Alright everyone, I figured we'd start off today with a little bit of a contrast video here, which is that if you look at the various failures of Beijing Biden, oftentimes they contrast with some of Trump's more notable successes. This is spurred on partially by what's happening currently at the U.S. border. By the way, while a lot of individuals are being turned away finally there, they've kind of got the situation in Del Rio locked down. They are still going to be resettling large numbers of these people in direct contravention of both international conventions and the U.S. stay in Mexico policy, which was upheld by federal court. So, I mean, the problem is only half solved. You got a Swiss cheese border. You belatedly start enforcing anything there. Then the legacy media starts freaking out about people whipping the Haitians, which isn't even happening there. And then you let half of them in anyway, so it's a fucking free-for-all. So I'm going to go through some of Biden's main failures, the more obvious ones, and show you how they contrast explicitly. Like there's a direct overlap, a direct contrast with what Trump accomplished during his presidency. Now, first and foremost, keep in mind, if you're watching this video on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment down below with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. I make 4 videos usually every day, but only 2 of them go on YouTube. The other 2 are exclusive to those sites, so you should be following me on 1 or more of those platforms. Also, keep in mind, I am streaming on Odyssey now as well. I'm thinking about doing that on Rumble. I have to look into their system because with Odyssey, it's like I finally belatedly figured out how to actually do that through StreamYard. With Rumble, it might take a little bit longer, so I'm going to do the best that I can. Now, I think Trump's biggest accomplishment overall was economic in nature. You didn't have any glaring economic issues during the Trump presidency. In fact, most indicators were considerably ahead of where they were predicted to be. You had higher than expected job growth repeatedly, lower than expected for some points in the presidency inflation. At a few points it was negative, actually, which is great. You don't get that very often. Certainly the unemployment rate fell to a near historical low. This is directly in contravention to what we're seeing under Beijing Biden. We've had lower than expected job growth multiple times, way higher than expected inflation, which is a de facto tax on the poor and middle class, who mainly their wealth is salary in nature, as opposed to the elites. Their holdings in real estate and shit like that, in an inflationary economy, they don't lose value. As an aggregate, they end up gaining more money. What Biden is doing is actually taxing the poor and the middle class right now, and elements of the upper middle class, and giving that free, funny money to the corporations and to the billionaires, just so that we're aware of what's happened since Biden has taken office. Now, some people may say, well, but the economy did collapse under Trump. Kind of, sort of, not really. Number one, the lockdowns imposed were not Trump's to impose. They were state level. Did we take a hit? Yes, but we managed to stay just out of a recession. We certainly didn't have the inflation rate that we have. That's also good. And I genuinely believe that if Trump hadn't been president, if Hillary had been in there, or Biden or something, we would have had a Great Depression. I believe that his years of deregulation and making the economy structurally stronger, what Trump did, is what prevented us from going absolutely bottoms up, or absolutely belly up. I do believe that. Unfortunately, if something like that were to happen now with, Beijing Biden in control, all bets are off. We might at least have another great recession, and of course all of the free money lending going on right now is probably going to cause that anyway, so you could have like a double or triple bubble popping in the next half decade or so. Maybe the next president isn't someone to envy, depending on when it happens. So the first would be the economy. Both inflation and joblessness, wages, everything else under the sun. The second would be the border. What we see under Biden is that immediately upon taking office, because he had portrayed the United States as uninterested in guarding the border under his potential leadership, lack thereof, really, people marched across. The problem is, if it's 1 or 2 people, you can just shoo them away and defend the border. It's not a problem. If it's 500,000 people, if you've got 12,000 people at this one closed border crossing, it becomes an almost impossible situation. The other problem with Biden's policy is the hypocrisy. You can't legally enter through any of those ports of entry, but illegals are immediately resettled. sometimes without proper documentation even taking place, because the border control is so overstretched. They're incapable of dealing with the situation. That's hypocrisy. You didn't have this under Trump, because people perceived the United States as interested in guarding the border, so fewer people bothered to even make the trip. Then we instituted the Remain in Mexico policy, which was reinstated after Biden unconstitutionally tried to ignore it. We had wall being built. That was an accomplishment. I still think that it's hilarious when people who are like, the further right individuals are like, we need like a 10,000 foot wall on the border. They don't realize that replacing a small chain link fence or a vehicle barrier with a 30-foot bollard barrier is a meaningful change. So they say, well, there was less than 100 miles of new wall was built. Yeah, but you retrofitted 400 miles plus of shitty old, totally not wall, of fucking vehicle barriers and stuff you could walk across, chain link fences that you could climb over quite easily. A little bit more difficult now. Again, the reason why there was any barrier in those spots in the first place was because they were more likely going to be the spots someone would think to cross. So you would want to retrofit them first. To the point where Biden has actually belatedly taken up a couple of Trump's pieces of advice, like all of the electronics or monitoring systems on the border, seismic monitors, etc., are going to be actually put up. Initially, Biden said no, but then when the border crisis got so bad for political purposes, just to survive, he had no choice. The third would be in foreign policy. This would be another big one. Donald Trump, first U.S. president to set foot in North Korea, managed to get bilateral talks between them and the ROK going, managed to get them to go an entire year almost without firing off a goddamn missile or anything. I would count that as a serious success. Biden, just by being elected, managed to piss that away. The North Koreans are back to prepping for nuclear tests, firing rockets and stuff. In Afghanistan, we went quite some time in Afghanistan without a single injury or death under Biden. He botches the withdrawal that Trump initially brokers. Again, another major success for Trump. Arguably, withdrawing from Afghanistan is Trump's greatest success. The problem is that the actual implementation of that plan got completely destroyed by the dude who came after, the asterisk administration, Joe Biden. Biden kind of gets us out technically, but prolongs our stay there, lays waste to Afghanistan, accidentally kills a U.S. contractor and lies and claims it was an ISIS member, splattering a bunch of kids, leaving a great big propaganda present for ISIS, by the way, in our absence, while leaving hundreds of Americans stranded in Afghanistan, breaking promise after promise. You didn't see that under Trump. In fact, you heard very little about Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that when Trump was president, because his policies worked. Well, if the policy's working, the enemy is being depleted, we're winning engagements, we've got other forces in the area, especially in like Syria and Iraq, that are kicking the shit out of ISIS. ISIS is being weakened. They can't attack as easily because they're being hounded on all sides by Iranians and Russians and shit. If things are going well, you don't report on it because Orange Man bad, right? And that's the other thing. And this is the fourth and final major achievement. Trump showed us very, very clearly, he told us, and the actions antagonized showed us, that the system is really against us. It is a rigged system. The people at the top don't care about the people at the bottom. Liberal economic policies don't give a shit about the poor. The people spewing identity politics don't give a shit about so-called minorities. The legacy media doesn't give a shit about journalism. Trump showed us all this, laid it all very bare. And he gave the solution. Stop caring. When they call you mean names, ignore them and laugh at them. Just meme them to death. And it worked. Biden is the opposite. Biden wants you to sit back and watch CNN, read the New York Times, and passively absorb it and do what you're told like a good little slave. And I think the fact that Trump gave the balls to the conservative movement back, at least to some extent, is arguably one of his greatest achievements. That's about all. Peace out.